Hi, this is Janie Cordes. I'm a Colorado real estate broker in Lakewood, Colorado with Keller Williams Advantage Realty. And this is a new podcast that my friend, Kobe Rex.
Good morning.
Good morning, Kobe. He's the operating principal and mortgage broker at AT Mortgage, and we're actually doing a 4-part series with our podcast that's called What's Next? And the positioning is, what's your next step in Denver real estate? And we're formulating this 4-part series after the 4 Ds. And Kobe, why don't you tell us what those 4 Ds are?
I will. Thank you.
Of course.
So they are death, divorce, diapers, and diamonds. So these 4 are some of the transitions that we see for families that make it where making a move in real estate happens. So death is quite obvious, divorce, and then for diapers, so new kids, and then diamonds, so getting married. So those are the 4 major places where I see life transitions that I love focusing on to help people walk through these moments.
Well, we'll start with the more depressing of the subject, which is death. And it's so unfortunate when you get that call or that knock on the door of really, really bad news. And let's focus today on the death of a remaining parent, because that's quite the scenario of what happens when you get an asset and there are heirs involved, and we need to speak to what happens with that asset after the death of a parent. And we talk about timing. Obviously, timing is extremely important. You do not want to approach anybody at the funeral, around the funeral. Everybody needs time to grasp what has happened to the family, to the matriarch or patriarch of the family. There could be a parent, a grandparent, a great-grandparent. So there's lots of people involved, and what we want to do is slow down. Do you see people rushing through this process at all, Kobe?
I do. A few years ago, I had my grandfather pass away. And this was a difficult situation because it was a blended family where we had both biological from my grandpa's side, and then my grandpa had remarried. So on the other side, all of a sudden now you're, number one, grieving the situation. And then also you're magically having to figure out we had a house that we were having to figure out what was going to happen. It was the house I actually grew up in. They moved into that house when my parents sold it to them. And basically we had the son of the mother-in-law that basically was not wanting to work with our side of the family, and there ended up having to be a buyout to give him his portion of equity. So there's so many different components when you're initially dealing with the emotional side, but then the relational aspect of how, especially if the will isn't clear, it can make what is already an emotional situation now a financially dicey situation if you don't have it properly spelled out.
Yeah, I think in life in general and in real estate specifically, communication and information is the key to success in everything. If you do not have the right information, you're not going to proceed forward with success. And you're right. I mean, the first thing is you have to have a clear title with that asset. You don't know if you're dealing with heirs, an heir, beneficiaries. So you have to have a clear understanding who who is going to be that decision maker regarding that asset. And if there are several parties involved, that's when it can be very complicated, because not only are they grieving a loss, and a lot of the times decision making can be reactive, and we want to be proactive. We want to be the anchor in the sea. We want to be the confident. We want to be the steady hand, guiding them through this process, because it is a process, not an event. So once we have that clear title, I like to get together with all the family members in person, and sometimes you have to do it over Zoom or email. That's the way of the world. But the most important thing is communicating with all parties. And I think that if you get into a situation like what you're dealing with, Kobe, where there are so many heirs, plural, that you have to go through that title and figure out how that title was brought forward to each of those heirs, and how it's going to work, and who is going to be that decision maker. And I guess that would be very, very tough in multiple heir situations.
It is. And every time, as a lot of these boomers and older generations right now are going through these situations, every time you go through a remarriage, a divorce, it was actually interesting, because this last weekend I was the financial advisor for my family gave my in-laws this really interesting packet. It's called Last 5 Wishes. And I really liked it because it spelled out some of the medical care, and then it really helped to list out who is going to take out some of those things. So I highly suggest having good financial advisors and other people that can support that. I really liked, there's lots of different things you can search, but I think that taking the time before you get in these situations, that even for me, I'm a little bit younger, with having kids, if anything, God forbid, happened to our family, it needs to be spelled out, not just and assume maybe even that both my wife and I go at the same time. What's that going to look like? It might seem clear to us, but when you are gone, it is amazing how your wishes might not actually be honored unless you spelled it out.
Exactly. And I think living wills are a good idea. I mean, I'm not a financial advisor, an attorney by any stretch of the imagination, but things happen, and you really do need to be prepared, because the people that are left to deal with the situation, there's a lot on their plate, from their own families, their own situations, their own jobs. And when they're looking at gaining an asset to be in charge of, you're going to have to be looking to that one family member who has the legal authority to pay off all the debts and move the process on. Where we come in, we have to be offering them the advice to the group. I mean, we have to be able to listen to everybody's expectations, and we have to be a really good listener, because when you have multiple family members, you're going to have different expectations of what happens to the asset, the money distribution, and it can be a bone of contention that really can break up families. So what I encourage people to do is just to take your time, and let the professionals handle the transaction.
I agree. I think that one of the hardest parts is when we were preparing for this episode, thinking about that specific instance, it is so nice to have the professionals who are experienced in this and can walk through it. And you're also going to have family members that are going to, and extended heirs that are going to operate in bad faith. You're going to have people that sometimes so Yvonne's son had a situation where he really wanted to get the money out, was delaying the ability of us to get the house on market, was not in agreement. And sometimes this isn't just a for the professionals, we are going to act in accordance with what the law says and what the will says and do what we can. However, at the same time, being prepared for the human aspect of it, that we're dealing with people that are not always rational, might be in a distressed situation. Sometimes if this house was in the family for a long time, even though it might make sense, all of a sudden someone might get emotional and say, I really want to keep the house. I think mom would have loved this. I'm like, well, this is a decision that we get to make together. So I think really relying on your real estate professionals, and then if you have any questions on the lending side of it and how we take care of that, it all needs to, we understand as the professionals that it's part logic in what the law says, and then we realize there's a human aspect of it that we have to manage as well.
Yeah, I've come into situations where there's been existing mortgages. Some of the heirs want to assume. There's a home that I dealt with that had a reverse mortgage on it. That gets back to my point about really listening to everybody's expectations, because at the end of the day, we want to make sure the family's good, and that is super important. To say at the end of the day, everybody loves one another, and we can move through this grief, and we can get the most money for the asset, or we can figure out if somebody does want to keep it, how we make that happen. And I wanted to talk briefly about when you were speaking about somebody's wishes in their will, and it reminds me of May Bonfils. Of course, we all know the Bonfils. They are a philanthropic family here in town, Denver Post. Their foundation is worth about $70 million now. They fund the arts and all kinds of great things all around Denver. But before all this happened, we had May Bonfils Stanton building this beautiful mansion, which was the Belmar area and Villa Italia Mall area. But she built this beautiful mansion, and it was rumored that when she died, she didn't want any woman to ever live there with all of her precious things that she went all through Europe collecting. And if her husband, Mr. Stanton, was to ever get remarried, the house would go to the Catholic Church. So the house did get torn down, and we never really knew why. But it is stated that the Catholic Archdiocese didn't really know what to do with it. But what a complex situation, the Bonfils family, and the enormous amount of wealth and the continued distribution to Denver that remains today. And it started with very specific instructions about how their wealth was to be distributed. And the destruction of what was the most magnificent house, it was absolutely beautiful. Torn down.
Wow.
We will never know.
Mm-hmm. You alluded to the fact with the reverse mortgages. And yeah. I think I was talking to a financial advisor this last week, and he talks about how reverse mortgages can be a really positive benefit for clients to not have to keep making normal mortgage payments. And going into this, it can free up that cash flow for them to have peace. My biggest thing that I see on the lending side is that when you're getting into these reverse mortgages, I would advise understanding how with these reverse mortgages, it's very easy to get into a negative equity situation for the heirs. So if you have a negative equity situation for the heirs, that's something that needs to be discussed. So for certain types of loans that are going to be reverse mortgages, there's protection for the heirs. There's only for FHA loans, there's a threshold that no matter what the balance is for the house, if the heirs want to maintain the house, they don't have to pay off this exorbitant, possibly way higher than what the actual value of the house is. A lot of times FHA products and stuff like that have a cap that allows the heir to maintain the property and maintain ownership if that's something that they wish. So if you are in a position where the person that you are having to dissolve the estate for had a reverse mortgage, make sure that you consult. I would be happy to look at the terms of whatever is there so that way we can address your specific situation. But especially with how much of our population is aging, it is important to make sure that you have an understanding of what the financial situation of the previous mortgage that your parents or whoever it was might have had.
That is such a good point, Kobe, and it also brings up another, if they don't have a reverse mortgage and we're looking at putting the house on the market, who's paying? What's going on with an existing loan? Let's say there's an existing loan on it still. How are we doing that?
So the most important thing is to start with, if someone can get a copy of the note, or if someone can look and figure out, get with title, because title a lot of times will have that information on who holds the lien. You need to figure out who holds the lien, and you need to let that mortgage note holder understand that, hey, this person is deceased, and each specific loan has different assumability. And what I would just highly suggest is this is not a time when the person that you're dissolving the estate for, you don't just stop paying on the mortgage. You need to be proactive. You need to get involved with title. You need to get involved with the real estate professionals. And there's no reason I couldn't, if you are going through this process, we can pull a credit report and we can go in and see who the servicer is. Even if they're deceased, we can see who the servicer is, and we can begin that conversation of continuing the assumability of the loan, or you're still going to, if you're going to sell the house, that's going to you're going to have to still pay off that mortgage. So that is the big thing, is understanding what is going on with that mortgage and making sure that it is continued, that you are able to continue the ability to operate for that property.
That brings up a really tough situation for some because they just can't afford carrying costs. And I can't even imagine having an asset that has a loan on it that is pricey, millions of dollars, and an asset that still has a loan. And that's where we come in, and as far as selling it, you cannot make a market here in Denver or anywhere, and you have to market to the market. And so I know everybody wants the most money for their house. I mean, everybody does, or their property, whatever the case may be as far as real estate. But you have to remember that those first 7 days when it presents, you just better be on top of the game to move the property, be priced right, sales and marketing perfect, and everybody's expectations of the process of presenting a house to the market and properly positioning it for success.
So, Jeannie, for that specific situation, for someone that maybe hasn't been in the market for a long time, how do you make the first 7 days look the best possible? If you're working with a client, how do you help them to make sure that they come out of the gate strong for those first 7 days?
Number one, you have to make sure the house is going to do its job. Mm-hmm. So if you go in overpriced, it's problematic because you only have one reputation. You go in with, somebody, the feedback starts, it's overpriced for condition. You start getting the negative feedback, and all of a sudden, it's why am I here? What did I do?
So should we be looking for like Zestimate, or how do you help your clients to determine that initial price?
I look at solds. I mean, what has sold within the last 30, 60 days. I look at any kind of, I look at features and benefits, okay? First of all, does this home have anything more ideal than what has sold? Maybe it sits on an incredible lot, okay? So we're going to be looking at pricing it with that in mind. Then you might have a lot that is backing up to a busy street and it has a bit of an exterior obsolescence issue. So you have to look at location as well, because we all know the number one rule in real estate is location. So that is a driver in lot premiums or lot deficiencies.
So making sure you're priced right, looking at comparable sales in the last 30 to 60 days. And then I think that's a great strategy. Are there any other things so how do you deal with a home maybe that's in a little bit more rundown shape because they couldn't maintain some of the things that they had done in their younger years?
One of the issues that comes up is that the lack of a property disclosure. The heirs or the beneficiaries have not lived in the house, so they don't know. And you have a deceased person that can't fill out paperwork. So you have to be real with your associates. You have to say no property disclosure. The house is priced for condition. You set people up for what the house is. You call the house what it is. You don't take these wonderful pictures of something that isn't. That's what I have found so...
You don't catfish them?
So disappointing is that you don't see what's there. And from an online presence, and I always talk to the brokers before I go out to any showing, just to make sure that what I'm seeing is what's been conveyed in writing. But managing expectations, that's what it comes down to. Managing the expectations of the market, the heirs, the beneficiaries, everybody involved, and your fellow associates. And that's where you get really great feedback. And hopefully you've done everything right, because as I said, you've got one chance to do it right.
And I completely agree. I think in my mind, there's two timelines. It's once you are notified of the death, and then once you're actually going to get the house listed. There's two really critical timelines. And one of the things that I did want to go back to for planning with wills and everything like that, if you are having one of your, so I'm married, I have 3 kids. For my specific situation, making sure that they understand what's going on with my life insurance. I've designed my life insurance policy with a professional. I'm not a licensed professional, but I would highly suggest you get someone in your corner, that you have a plan that what are you going to do what are your heirs going to do if they pass away? If I pass away, I have a life insurance policy that gives her the flexibility that if she wants to pay off the mortgage, she doesn't have to worry about it. And that's something that you really want to, it's not just the real estate partner, it's not just the mortgage lender, and it's not just waiting until this happens. A lot of times, a lot of this planning, I hope some people that are we have a great age range between me and Janie, and I hope some younger people are listening to this. And if you're in this position listening to this as a younger listener, you have a lot more runway to make decisions. If you want to look at getting insurance, how are you writing your wills? Even if you are older, this is a great podcast to remind yourself that an ounce of preparation is worth a pound of cure.
You're so right, Kobe, because when I was growing up, my parents worried about me going to college to find a husband. A lot of people in that age group, they just weren't focused on professional careers. And I think it's so wonderful that the younger generation has had so much access to information to make them smarter, more aware. As many of the negative things that the internet has brought, it has brought some positive things to our young ones, because they have more information. They can research wills. They're looking online for real estate. They're much more savvy than when I was in my 20s. So I'm proud of them. I'm proud of how smart our younger generation is, and so being in my generation, I feel it is so wonderful to be able to mentor and give advice to that younger generation, because I look at it on a whole different perspective and 40 plus years in the business. So, and I still relate to them. I have kids in, the 30s, and we hang out. So, but I just think you're so right. I hope people are listening to this and getting really prepared for the unexpected, because it does happen. That knock on the door is, it's just a gut wrench, and it's a horrible time for people. So preparedness is wonderful. Keeping everything calm, steady, communication going. You'll do okay. So with that, I think we can wrap that up. Kobe, what do you think?
Yeah, I think that's, if you ever need anything, Janie, what's the best way people can get a hold of you?
720-936-6691. Always on that phone.
And over here, same thing. I'm always on my phone, 719-287-3228. I really hope this episode does a little bit to illuminate some of the thoughts about this. As much as we don't like to think about this, there is a certainty that this will happen sometime in your life, and having this as a resource and to constantly revisit this. And I would highly suggest this is about building your tribe of advisors. It's about having the professionals so that way every night when you go to bed, you know that whether it's anything happening to you or anyone you love, that there is a plan, there is some understanding, and that there are professionals like Janie and myself that are one call away, excited to bring peace to your situation.
Thank you so much, Kobe. It's been a pleasure.
Looking forward to our next episode. We're going to talk a little bit more about the second D. We're going to talk a little bit more about divorce. And until then, thank you so much for listening, and see you next time.